Bienvenidos todos y todas.
So I'm going to give the floor now to Liliana Buitrago, who is going to be welcoming us to this online event by the Ecosocial Pact, and she's going to be moderating the seminar with me. So thank you so much, Liliana. Thank you very much, Manuel. Welcome. Welcome to everyone to this event that for this Ecosocial Pact of the South. And so we are a group of people who have been carrying out activities during the pandemic, and one way or another, the Ecosocial Pact of the South comes out of the concern that we've had about the global collapse that we are going through. And it comes out as an initiative with a proposal from social movements, the academics, researchers in Latin America. And specifically motivates us toward that is the urgency that we are feeling. We are working on different pillars, trying to articulate all of the different knowledge that people have and the things that we can do from the South in Latin America is Abya Yala, as it's known as the indigenous, by the indigenous people in this region of the world. And so these come out as alternatives and proposals. And also, you know, if we do, you know, making a bridge between knowledge from different areas of research. So to this effect, there's a lot of different organizations that are part of the Ecosocial Pact of the South. And some of these organizations are here with us today. And a lot of the initiatives are here and they're saying hello in the chat here, many of these different organizations, and we are going to be talking a little bit about what it is that we do through the content that we have here in this forum, which what we're looking to do is to show these proposals and talk about just transitions in these very chaotic times. So, you know, to give you a little bit of context about this space that we have today, especially relating to the way in which territories are being attacked at this time here throughout Latin America. We have invited a group of activists from the pact that are part of the Ecosocial Intercultural Pact of the South. And so we're going to talk about who is here with us today. We have Carmen Aliaga. Carmen Aliaga is part of the coordination of socio-environmental action, which is also known as the collective CASA. And she's also part of the Latin American network of defense, women defending. She's a feminist. She's a doctorate in rural development from the Mexican University in Xochimilco. We're also here with Pablo Bertinet, who's the coordinator of the Observatory of Energy and Sustainability of the National Technological University in Argentina. He is, Pablo is a member of the Ecological Workshop. He works on issues relating to energy with many different social networks, territorial networks, environmentalists, and unions. He's also a member of the Energy and Equity Working Group. Also here with us today is Blanca Chancosa. She is a Quechua indigenous woman who's from Cotacachi in the Ecuadorian highlands. She has a degree in educational science, but she is a historic leader of the Ecuadorian indigenous movement, where she has held many different posts. She was the co-founder of CONAI, which is the Indigenous National Movement, and also is the president of her Highlands branch of this, which is called Ecuador. She has also managed the women's leadership school called Dolores Cacuango. Also, we're here with Tatiana Roa, who is Colombian. She is an engineer and activist and an environmentalist. She's part of Sensat, Living Water of Colombia, and the Ecosocial Pact of the South. She has a master's degree in Latin American studies from the Simón Bolívar Andean University and a doctorate from the University of Amsterdam. She participates in the Energy and Equity Journal, which is edited by Latin American organizations, and also the Political Ecology Journal, which edited by Icaria. She has also participated as an activist on networks such as Oil Watch, the Alliance for Colombia Free from Fracking, and she also participates in several other different research groups like the Alliance for Water Justice, also the Working Group for Political Ecology of Abya, and as well as other groups. Additionally, we're also here today with Breno Bringel, who's a sociology professor of the State University of Rio de Janeiro, who's a director of the Latin American Association of Sociology, and who has pushed forth a series of experiences and initiatives for research. And he works on many issues related to food sovereignty, agroecology, and socio-environmental justice. And so I would now like to pass the floor to Breno so that he can give us a little bit of context as far as what it is that we are living right now here in Latin America, about the issues that we're dealing with as the Eco-Social Intercultural Pact of the South, and for him to tell us a little bit about how he is seeing, and he could tell us a little bit about the context that we are seeing in Latin America. Thank you very much, Liliana, Manuel, also for the presentation. Hello to everyone. Thank you for my introduction. I'm really happy to be here with you today in this dialogue. And I don't have much time, so I'm going to go right into what Liliana has mentioned. I would like to start by saying that over the last couple of years, we've really been living at a simultaneous way two major events, which is the pandemic on the one hand, but also these social uprisings. And so these protests that we've seen in many of our different countries over the last 3 years, I think that we can see that we're going to have more and more of that going forward. So in both cases, there's this feeling of people that are just fed up, and urgency in a time when there's just a lot of instability and people just can't take it anymore. And so a lot of these uprisings and also the pandemic come out of these difficult events that are really changing the previous social order, that are really touching our lives in many different ways. There's many different, changing points, a lot of movements that are happening both at the micro and the macro levels. And so these uprisings, it's like a new time of struggle in the region, which is different from what we've seen in the past. So here, these uprising, they get bigger, they complement the fights, the struggles, they're more massive, but they're fundamental. These are the struggles of the communities, of the territories. And sometimes it's really difficult to see what is the purpose of these horizons, of these protests. That's really has to do with opposition, challenging the power, where we have to go from there to really expand our voices of change and expand toward new horizons. So the critical areas that we see in Latin America is that it's really difficult for a lot of people to understand these uprisings, because they're really uprisings that are really, contradictory and complex. And so there's been a lot of, new things that have come out as the way that people are called to participate in these. And you can't really understand it, looking from a traditional point of view, or like from a leftist or right-wing form of, way of looking at things. And so these uprisings are working as like social thermometers. They're like symptoms of the disease that people are living. And so, another thing that's not obvious and that we've seen and that we continue to see are the different paths that we've taken, especially like right before the pandemic in Ecuador and Chile, in Colombia, as well as those cases that came up during the pandemic in Peru, again in Colombia last year. and more recently in Cuba. And so for those of us who are interested in this, we're going to be publishing a book called Desbordes. And so we're going to see a lot of what's going on here, and you're going to be able to download that. And I'm sure that somebody's going to be able to put the link in the chat so you can download that book. But when we talk about the pandemic here, Latin America really has to reconstruct itself coming out of the pandemic at a really difficult time, a lot of turbulence, a lot of geopolitical difficulties, where we start seeing the attempts that we have of political agents that are dominant. They're trying to, reaccommodate themselves in their capitalist ways. We've got, we've got destruction of ecosystems, and we've got overuse of nature. And so there's a socio-environmental devastation that we're seeing. And so what we see regionally when it has to do with an increase in poverty, hunger, inequalities, a lack of access to basic rights that are just broken down every single day, all of that hand in hand with the militarization, violence, repression, forced migration. All of these are faces, different sides of the same coin. They're different sides of a profound eco-social crisis that needs response in the short, medium, and long term. And so this is where we have this need for a just transition, and also the Ecosocial Pact of the South. So despite this crisis that we're seeing, there are a lot of things that don't really help us. And so I just really want to talk about a few issues here. First of all, we're still discredited of when everything that we're talking about political science, but we haven't been able to channel this social discontent in a way that's really transformative. Second, the Latin American region today is much more fragmented, sometimes is not able to work on a global level. We've got this Latin American regionalism in the inter-American region, but we could also say the same thing, not only between the different states, but when we talk about the different difficulties that we have of integration, when we talk about the people themselves coming together. We also have a lot of incapacity, which is sometimes political, sometimes it's cognitive, of the governments in really finding answers, giving answers to these problems, especially when we talk about immediate issues, as well as things that have to do with more strategic matters. And so most of the political forces in Latin America, sometimes, the different, progressivists and also the right wings, are just really not at the level of this historic moment, both as far as them in the, looking back and looking toward the future. They don't really understand, or they don't want to understand, that we're going to a new situation when it comes to the future of our planet. Like this recommended book that we have of Maristelo, a couple of other people that are here with her today. I mean, the collapse is here, and there's people who just aren't seeing it. And so people don't see it because when we talk about Latin America, oftentimes we have so many dichotomies when we look at the regional reality. We've got this, what's going on right now. On the one hand, you've got the progressivists, and then on the other side, you've got a growing force of the right-wing leaders. And so, but the reality in Latin America is much more complex. And so sometimes it's hard to find these different orientations that are really repositioning themselves right now. And so right now what we need to do is understand and act when we're talking about all of these changes. So yes, we're trying, the right wing that's more radical is trying to gain space here when we're looking at all of these political crises that we're living, but it's more difficult following Trump's loss. But now, we hope that Bolsonaro will also be defeated this year. That's what we hope for, at least. But let's be really clear, Bolsonarism is not something that's going to die. The right wing of the society is going to continue, and that's going to be a major challenge, because we're talking about a lot of destruction that comes from that side. And so when we look at these different authoritarian forces, oftentimes they come out saying that they're moderate. So we can see that they can be very, very threatened by these different projects that have really gone continue to be expanding. And so we have this profile that tries to paint itself as being something that's more central right. We also have a certain restructuring of progressivism. And so here it seems really obvious, but which is the heterogeneity of these different processes. I think there's three different positions that are different when we talk about this. On the one hand, we have what we could be called as conservative progressivism. These are old political forces that were, working in this progressivism at the beginning of the century. Maybe they weren't part of it, but they were there. And so they say that they're, coming back, like Argentina, Brazil, Bolivia, and then they've got a discourse that's, really optimistic. They don't come out of social movements, but it's more of a, they don't really have a territorial basis. And so these are old political forces. They work, they talk about the socio-environmental issues in a way that's very similar to more moderate right-wing groups. So in Argentina, these are the ones that are talking about oil as being the only option for overcoming poverty. And so because of this and other purposes that we can see here, we can see that this is more of a force of containment than transformation. And so even though it sounds paradoxical, these are more like conservatives. And then we also have authoritarian progressives, and these are, we're talking about these groups that say that they're leftist, but they haven't gotten out of the progressive. They've really taken on, and they went into, they're really, we know what kind of cases we're talking about here. And then we've got something that it's maybe a little bit more to define, but it's something that we could define as being progressivism of the second generation progressives. And so, for example, looking at Chile, Colombia, in this case, these are forces that are trying to take over national governments with more of a society-based movement. And they also come out of social movements that have happened recently. They really, they're more neoliberal, and there's, they have more to do with grassroots groups. And so in this last case, the label that we have, because in both cases, we have really interesting process when we talk about political experimentation that I think could go, really any way. So they might flirt a little bit with progressivism. They can also contribute to opening up new horizons, new options that are more similar to transformative leftists. And so when we talk about this ecosocial discussion in Chile and Colombia, we see that this is really moving forward quite a bit more than in other countries in the region. And so to that effect, as opposed to the United States or other countries where the government has a major role, in Latin America, the governments really have little or nothing to say about the matter. And so when we talk about these just transformations in Latin America, really they come from the margins, and that's where the Ecosocial Pact of the South comes in. And so it's really interesting, just for me to close up what I wanted to say here, things that we don't see in conventional analyses about Latin America. We see that today in Latin America, there's a reorganization of the left wings parties, which are critical of progressivisms, which are working more locally in a at different levels to put together new mediations, new instruments, new organizations, and working politically in a different way. So we're talking about political forces and social forces that are really focused on their territory, and they're anti-capitalist, they're anti-colonial, anti-racist, environmentalist, and feminist. And so, the changes that we need to come from the society, from these movements, from the youth, feminist, indigenous, Black groups, from community-based struggles. And these are the forces, and none of the other ones are the ones that in Latin America are really making these proposals for systemic changes and environmentalist changes. And so these are the forces that, together with other players, like, for example, the Ecosocial Pact, is also working on. And so, Liliana, I just wanted to say two things about our pact, which is one thing I'd like to say about the proposals and the contributions, and also about the challenges and the new horizons. So the Ecosocial Pact was a pioneer in Latin America and the South because of its timing, because I think it was something to try to bring together, to visibilize a series of options that weren't really coming together. And so they focused on looking at eco-social, grassroots ideas from different scales, from the local, national, regional areas, but also from different times, right? Mixing together between the short, the medium, and long-term solutions. And so with the different contributions that we've seen of the pact, and there's several of them, but we could really highlight the creation of a comprehensive proposal which doesn't separate environmental from social. And so when we put together this social, gender, ethnical, and environmentalist agenda. So we've really worked to take apart that idea of hegemony, that it's either social or environmental, that oftentimes progressives end up, really taking apart, or putting the fight against poverty as being something that's disconnected from social and environmentalist issues. And so if we really look here clearly, and we look at the map of environmental destruction and the map of poverty, I mean, in Latin America, it's just incredible what we see there. But the pact has also helped us to really think about the centrality and the relationship between how we take care of the environment, and also to create a regional coordination possibility between different organizations, trying to really push forward all of these different networks that we have and the different issues that the different organizations are focused on. And so it's to this effect that over these last 2 years basically that we've seen from the Ecosocial Pact, which started at the beginning of the pandemic, we've been in many different events, campaigns that are related to territorial, national territorial matters. We've also worked on different community matters, a lot of procedures that have been underway, a lot of different processes at the territorial level, national, regional, and global level. And so there's many different limitations that we have. And so, but what I would really like to close is by saying that the Ecosocial Pact of the South is tried to be a proactive actor here when we talk about just transitions in Latin America. And so I hope that my colleagues will be able to talk a little bit more about this and talk about the different alternatives and the different experiences that are so experienced, so that we can build this moving this path of moving forward from false illusions and really moving forward in a positive manner. So thank you. Thank you very much, Brino. And now we are going to talk more about proposals and alternatives. But before doing that, I would like to invite all of the different participants, apart from your comments, to put questions in for the speakers here in the chat, in the Zoom chat. And so we are now going to talk about different proposals. Resistance in Latin America have been created based on the exploitation of territories and the deterioration of the conditions of reproduction of life. And this has been happening in a strong way because Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the regions of the world that have been most attacked by global capital, but at the same time with a historic accumulation that's of practices for us to really think about transitions with justice. There's a number of questions that come up. So first of all, like, what are the experiences that we're talking about? In which conditions do they come about? And what are their potentials, especially now, or with the new administrations, more progressive administrations here in the region? What are the critical points to look at? And so I'm going to ask Pablo here, and welcome, Pablo. What are the experience that you've seen in energy, and what are the different tensions that you see when we talk about moving forward on these matters? Go ahead. Thank you very much, Manuel. I'm really happy to be able to be here with all of you here today and to be able to really reflect on these different matters. And so maybe to get started, what I'd like to say is that I'm going to try to make an observation that goes beyond what has been specifically talked about in this community management. And so starting here, because the intention here is to be able to see, in connection to the second part of your question, which is what are the different pillars, or what are the experiences? How are they going to contribute to an energy transition, at least from when we look from the point of view of an energy transition at a grassroots level, which is what we are pushing forward. And so it's within this framework to talk about experiences, community management, and when it comes to energy, it's nothing new. And what we really need is to base ourselves on a central stage of this different management and energy transition that has to do with resistance. So a lot of the experiences that we see today when it comes to community management, we talk about alternatives to energy transitions, have come out of resistance, especially when we talk about extractive projects. And so here we can talk about recovering everything that has to do with when we talked about when we were against the different dams in different parts of Latin America and Colombia and Brazil, and in the challenge that we have throughout Latin America that have been really the seeds for new proposals. Oftentimes we don't really see, we don't see schools where people talk about energy transformation. And so what we see here is that, so we can see, for example, experiences that have to do with changes in energy policies. And so they didn't come out as a proposal that was like just a theory, but rather como, really real alternatives to be able to create proposals that are specific and that really dispute this logic of how extractive projects in the region are being carried out. So in most cases, the first experience that we have at the community level has to do with the resistance as being the first stage. Now, alternatives that we're talking about are not just alternatives that have to do with, or they're not alternatives that are merely technological. We're not talking here about technological alternatives. Here we're talking about alternatives that are essentially social. Here we're talking about alternatives when it comes to management. We're talking here about alternatives that are about territorial disputes. We're talking about alternatives that allow us to generate ways of life and to satisfy needs in places where none of that exists, where there is no response to the needs that different communities have. So here we're talking basically about alternatives in places where the state is not present and where it does not provide any satisfaction to the community. So into this framework, we could list a number of alternatives. And so, here we could share that here we have been doing many different presentations virtually about different community alternatives that we see, and we can put our link here where we can see all these different experiences that we've been sharing virtually, where we can talk about the Madre Selva in Guatemala, about the different dams, about for them to create food locally, what's going on in Colombia with biodigesters, and to be able to really develop alternatives when it comes to energy. But what I would really like is really when we talk about these different experiences and this community management as being an experience that is related to energy transition. And I think that experiences like the urban movements for the right of energy and urban movements against an increase in energy fees are experiences that really go against the energy logic that we see and also are pointing toward an energy transformation. And so the experiences of, for example, the different unions of the electrical union in Uruguay working together with, homes that are trying to improve their electrical facilities. And so these are the kind of things that lead us to think about other kinds of alternatives that we can have when it comes to creating a new model when it talks about energy. And so how to build a local consumption model for food, which is also part of an energy transition, because it makes us that we need to think about how food gets around, transportation in Latin America. And so, when we talk about transportation issues, why it's so important to consume locally. These are all experiences that contribute to an energy transition at the grassroots level. So we're not talking about experiences that have to do with theories, but rather experiences that exist within different cooperatives and communities at different levels within our society, and that are really the way in which our communities find a way to really dispute this energy transition. And oftentimes these are local experiences, very clearly in most cases. The fact that something is local doesn't mean that it's a guarantee, but it is an opportunity that we have. Things that are done locally is the opportunity that we have, and it means the possibility to really dispute different logical matters and looking for a different way that we can have a relationship between ourselves and energy. So now, So within which framework is all of this happening? All of these, this amazing number of community experiences, of different different ideas, different ways that we can create, how we define relationships between each other. So this is all part of a dispute for the for energy transition. There is no energy, there's no single vision when it comes to an energy transition. So it's within that framework. Here we can see different views, a corporate view when it comes to the to the energy transition, where we can see this as being a possibility for accumulating wealth and also geopolitical hegemony, with looking from a corporate, a patriarchal point of view. When we talk about this energy transition that's corporate based. And so where here our colleagues from this research group call this accumulation through decarbonization. And so what they're proposing is a new way in which this process of decarbonization, looking at it as being the only way to have an energy transition, is just a new cycle of capitalist accumulation, taking advantage of this new process that has to do with energy transition. So when we try to take this on, what we are proposing is a different type of model for energy transition, one that is based on socio-environmental justice, which puts energy in the area of rights and takes energy out of the market, and really understands the need to transform the entire energy system in and of itself. And so we're not talking about just changing the energy, the productive matrix. We don't just want to change the source of energy. What we want to change is the energy system, understood as being a set of social relationships that connect the humans with nature and that are determined by the relationships that we have right now. And so that's where we talk about proposing this sort of energy transition from a grassroots level. And so what we really believe is that we can strengthen those experiences that have really contributed to this energy transition. And so what this means is to think about alternatives that where we can move towards demercantilization, that imply going through a deprivatization, strengthening public goods, and not just thinking about the state, but rather all the different ways that we can talk about things being done publicly at the cooperative level, at the community level, at the commune level. These are all things that we believe can be the seed of looking at a different way that we can have a community management of energy under other conditions, but also to be able to move forward on process of democratization, deconcentration, decentralization of the energy system, hand in hand with building these experiences. And so within this framework, and just to close up here, we are facing something totally new, this new proposal, this Green New Deal, and that's happening around the world. So in our region, we are looking at it not only from what Breno was talking about when we talk about these new drivers and toward, oil to eliminate poverty, but rather what we're looking here is looking at different proposals for, mining lithium, increasing production of copper, wind power, balsa wood in Ecuador, hydrogen, green hydrogen, which is something that we have in our region, which is really has a lot of processes going on in our areas. All of these processes are clearly associated fundamentally with a transition that only sees decarbonization as a problem. And this is the main problem that we are facing right now in our region when it comes to trying to look at these major extractivist projects that are in our region, and this view of a green transition, especially coming from the first world. And so here we have a lot of resistance against this here in our region. And we see that there's a lot of disputes that are coming out of this in our region. And we believe that it's necessary for us to really think about a path for energy transition at the grassroots level that's going to help us to be able to see what exactly is the role that we as grassroots organizations are going to have when we are talking about in this energy transition in our region. So here, community experiences are the basis that what we're basing ourselves off of. This is our seed about how things are going to be working. This is how we're going to manage issues of property. This is a dispute that we're working on when it comes to the energy transition, that what we're looking to work against a corporate energy transition that's only going to lead us into a new cycle of economic accumulation, capitalist accumulation. So thank you so much. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. If you could put your questions in the area that says Q&A in the question, not in the chat. If you could put it in the Q&A section, that would be great. So that later then we can do a Q&A at the end. So Liliana, go ahead.
Micrófono.
Perdón, sí, que el micrófono me estaba
I
fallando.
had my mic off. I'm sorry. So, and to the same effect, when what Pablo is talking about, also we can talk about how in Latin America, these are proposals that come from communities that look at life at its different complexities. And so one experience is not only valued, based on its initiative when it comes to, something that's very specific that could be with energy, but also these are alternatives where, food has a major role,
Defensa de territorio,
territorial defense,
de formas muy creativas,
in
además.
really creative ways, a vindication of the role of women. And so there are many different, sides to looking at this. And it has a lot to do with food sovereignty, which is a notion that has really come up out of Latin America. And Tatiana is going to talk to us a little bit about that. So Tatiana, can you tell us a little bit about the experiences that you have to do with agriculture in the countryside, the experience that women have in Latin America, and what are the different disputes that we are seeing today? Well, first of all, thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm really happy to be here today with such amazing and interesting people, like all of the people that are here today writing in the chat, contributing with their ideas, their questions. And so I would, facing the question that Liliana asked me, which I really appreciate her acting as moderator and also her question, I would like to start by saying one thing. From the movements that we have of peasants, when I talk about peasants, I would really like to talk about it from a broad perspective. When we talk about, to understand when I talk about peasants, what am I talking about? That these are peasants who are hardworking, they don't have any land, or fishermen. These are all a whole, wide range of different worlds that exist within the peasant population. There's a lot of richness when we talk about how this debate of energy transition is understood in the different debates that incorporate food sovereignty, because effectively, for several decades now, there's been a Latin American movement that's been really strong, in addition to the one that, calls out to all these different peasant organizations. And we've got the network of ecological agriculture farm workers of Latin America that are really have so many different experiences that they're developing when we talk about food sovereignty, and when they talk about how they've worked towards local markets and really pushed forward new techniques when it comes to farming techniques that they've been using over the years, also with policies that are in these green revolutions that we're seeing, and the blue revolution, all of these different revolutions that really have started working in the field and really have started putting in different parts. The way that they work now uses a lot of energy. It consumes most of the water throughout the globe, but it's also just, these are ways of farming that creates a series of problems and issues and conflicts when you're talking about the countryside. And so if we look at things from this point of view, the role of all of these different movements is really important when we think about this idea of the transition, because we're talking about a main issue, which is food. And food is the main source of energy that we as humans need. And that during most of our life that we humans live on the planet that's been our main source of energy, our food. That alongside with biomass. And so then all the different processes that have to do with, food as being a way to give us the energy that we need, and also the biomass to be able to really create this energy. And so if we look at it from that point of view, the peasant movements have really understood energy from a broader view than what we tend to do when we talk about energy, when we tend to think about cables and towers and engines and different devices, but not thinking from that broad point of view that when we think about the different organizations, the peasant movements that have come in pushing forward, all of these different clean options that we have that would really promote food sovereignty. So from that point of view, these processes have really understood that an energy transition really does require deep cultural transformations. And so food here is really a key issue. I said before that food takes up, most of the energy that we consume on the planet is generating food, and that creates a whole chain of problems. And so when we transform those forms of agriculture that really, so we can depend less and less on fossil fuels and that consume less water, and that contribute to cooling down the planet, but that also conserve the seeds that will make it possible to take on this climate crisis. These seeds that will allow us to have crops when we have very dry periods or something that's going to be difficult, and when we have excessive rain. This is all this knowledge that we've had for millenniums about this work, this research and practice and technology that has been developed by the peasants. These are going to be really important when we talk about this climate change crisis that we're facing. So these different experiences, additionally, over the last couple of years, we've already heard a little bit from Pablo about this, that these have been coordinating and articulating with other issues. It's not just food production. It's also how that joins together with community management of water, how that has to do with community management of forests and other natural assets, and how that's connected to a community energy, which are decentralized energy, which is a renewable energy that has many different forms. We've got a democratic energy. And so here what we find in all of these different experiences, which we see in schools, in the School of Energy here in Colombia, where we have the participation of several different peasant organizations. For example, the group from Santander, also the different communities that struggle against the hydroelectric plant in Lituango, and also as we see in the different organizations that really articulate water, food, energy, forests, to be able to generate really great processes where we can produce food, but also manage water and take advantage of that type of energy, which is biomass energy, which is solar energy, which is, processes when it comes to energy efficiency, the use of biomass, which has been, has been such a problem, but has also been important when it comes to the peasant organizations. And we also can see here how we can generate a whole series of different experiences, like hydraulic energy at the small scale. We've seen how they've been able to recover these different areas, how we've been able to really push forward mills that are able to mill grain that have been recovered, that have been abandoned. And so in places like Colombia, where in the mountains, all of these different ways that we can have hydraulic energy. And they're really important when we talk about peasant processes. And so these are the things that we're looking at now. And also, as was proposed earlier, of course, this requires effort. There are really major challenges because we need to go a little bit, swim against the current, these progressive movements that say that the only possibility that they're looking at, and we're starting to see this in the debate, in the electoral debate that's kind of starting to come up in Colombia, when we start talking about this energy transition, but that we start to see that people are thinking about this energy transition without taking into account that type of experiences at the small scale, but that when we look at the importance that we have to transform an agro-industrial model like the one that we have today that has really, done so much damage to our territories, that's polluting, that's generating a whole series of conflicts within the territories. It's an alternative, but also at a time like the one that we're seeing now, when we have a food crisis, when we have an amazing increase in the price of foods, today food production becomes really important in any sort of process. When we're talking about any sort of struggle, any sort of resistance, any process that has to do with, when we're talking about how we can have a transformation of our society. And so I would like to stop there. I know that I'm kind of coming up against, my time is running out. And so I don't know if there's any other sort of questions or something else that people want to talk about. We can talk about that in the Q&A session. Thank you so much, Tatiana. That was so interesting. Also, something that you mentioned, that these peasant communities have knowledge that's really particular, and defending that knowledge in these indigenous peoples are so important. Unfortunately, Blanca couldn't be with us today. She was unable to, and she said that she's really sorry, but it was really difficult for her to be able to get connected today. However, I think that in the reflections that both you and Carmen and our other colleagues have mentioned, is that it's really important to emphasize that for indigenous peoples are just so important to all of these different struggles, and that these spaces are really come from a constellation of subjectivities that are just amazingly large. And so within that richness, that wealth of options, that's where, really, that's really where life is in the balance, hangs in the balance. And so to talk a little bit about the role of women, Carmen is going to talk about that issue now. Manuel, okay, now we're going to hear from Carmen Aliaga, who's going to talk about the different experiences from feminisms, from the eco-territorial feminism. So as we know, the pandemic has made more visible how this is a multi-level crisis, where the crisis of care is really central, the differentiated impacts, how they're different for women, and they really speak for themselves. And we can see that there's an increase in femicides, precarization of reproductive rights, sexual rights, and this is a key issue in the United States. And the Republican Party is really moving forward on this by penalizing abortion. And this lack of care systems, and so that has to do with the socio-ecological collapse that's overcoming us. And so, Carmen, how do you see the role of women and gender diversity when we talk about a just transition for the region? Can you tell us a little bit about the experiences that we see here in Latin America? Go ahead, Carmen. Welcome. Thank you, Manuel. Thank you, Liliana, as well. Thank you to all of you who are listening here. I'm really excited. I think here from the Ecosocial Pact of the South, we're really excited about all the different questions that we're seeing. And we think that it's really possible to really have a better, building in a collective manner with all the participation that we're seeing. So I'd really like to start out by talking a little bit about
desde el cual les voy a exponer es un poquito de las
Here I'm going to talk a little bit about the experience that we've had with it, peasant indigenous women who are fighting against mining and have been doing that for many different decades. And so this happened before the pandemic, and there's a lot of issues that now have become very urgent. But particularly when we talk about the Andean area of Bolivia, which is like the zone that has been called agro mining, but where there's mining from the colony. And so I'd like to talk about this when we hear what we heard from Tatiana and from Pablo. I'd really like to look at this from, looking at the impacts, the conditions, the current situation from an comprehensive view. And I think that right now we're at this point where we can't really separate out these different issues, neither the politics of transformation or the conditions or the national context. And so, for those of us who've been working for several years now as women who are resisting mining extractivism, we start to see the relevance of seeing the issues that come out of communities where for decades now they haven't had any water because of this mining that's happening, and they are now they're looking at their right to water, how women have to do with this, what are the different impacts, how this is affecting health in a way that's almost like genocide in many different communities. And in this case, these are communities that have been affected by mining, but others because of pesticides, or other because of mega corporations that are going in there. And so it becomes more and more to light. And so we see the effects of climate change here, where there was no water before. Now we start seeing that we're having droughts or floods. And on the other side, we can also see that for the past 2 years, we've seen the effects of the pandemic. And of course, while the pandemic has come to like really unearth and show all of the precarious conditions and in which many communities and many women manage their lives, it's also an opportunity for us to really look at the different alternatives we have and think maybe in a more urgent way than ever the construction of this collective subject of transformation based on local experiences. And so I want to tell you that, for example, one of the local initiatives that Pablo was telling us is something that's really fundamental to really trust and really work towards these local community options and look at it at a higher scale, not only in Latin America, but I think we can also talk about the global South in general. And I just wanted to tell you also a little bit that one of the campaigns that we've seen, one of our colleagues in Bolivia is a campaign that was really simple, very, kind of artisanal. It's something that we saw in the communities where they're showing the incompetency of the state that wasn't even able to bring, aspirin into the communities, is saying that here, you've got to wash your hands all the time and eat healthy and all this, but in communities where there was no water, and so where the women were already sick, or where we had children who had, kidney problems because of the polluted water that they had with heavy metals. And so just look at this, like how they can manage the pandemic, trying to make make civil society and the communities take charge of this, and where they had to take care of their own care and find their own food, health, education. For millions of women are the ones that really, and especially indigenous women who are in the working in rural areas, who were, highly precarious, especially in the outskirts of cities. And so after, looking at these different conditions of precariousness, we start managing community options, not as a political force, but as a need for survival. And so this is something that it's important for us to be able to detect, not only in Bolivia, but also, in Central America, in Mexico, in many different countries where we are here together in our Latin American network, where there has been, different political organizations, where there's a political subject, particularly that has been led by women who have been able to get, platforms, mother centers, coordination between themselves, and managing health management, where there is our political organization, where there are, of course, more conditions, ways that we can take on, a crisis like we saw in the pandemic. There have been women who have only been able to manage policies that existed before, but
Ay, no sé si me siguen escuchando, me dice que
we are having a little problem with the internet. Okay, so I'm going to continue, and if you can't hear me, okay. So what I was trying to say is that it's important to identify how these alternatives and this social way of putting together organizations in the day-to-day lives of really putting life first and care first in our bodies, that is really the most important thing when we talk about political feminist, where we talk about people talk about our body, our territory, and defending ourselves. It's not just a slogan, it's rather it's a priority and a policy. And so this entire crisis when it comes to care that gets which has come and just really taken us over here, and it's been happening for a long time, but with the pandemic it became much stronger. This is also an opportunity for us to see what can be done within the communities. And I would also like to look at how we can build alternatives as we try to create autonomy. So maybe in these communities that have tried to think about health, and I think that that's what Tatiana was talking about when we talk about food, that health is one of the dimensions. And so here what we see is that the state, you can see here, you do what you can, because we can't do anything about this. We're not going to do anything. And if you want to survive, then see how you can do it. And so the communities try to do what they can, working to try to recover their old knowledge and restore their their territories where they used to where they used to grow medicinal plants. And how are the different ways, what did their grandparents used to do? We don't have any farms. We don't have any hospitals. So what did our grandparents do? Like, how did they take care of themselves? So how do we use the plants and to be able to like reconnect with these medicinal plants and healthy land, and to really expand beyond just the community or that plot of land to really to see. So listen, if we do have medicinal plants, and we've really got to manage our own food as well. And so there's all the things that we had been, civilization be giving us, the different processed foods, but then women start looking for different ways that they can recover this food sovereignty that they used to have, and look at our collective bodies that have gone through so much violence from extractivism and crisis, and the climate crisis, and start to think about like, how are we going to restore this collective body in our territory? And so I think that this notion, this broad notion of restoration of our collective body in our territories as a form of life, and I think that this is something that's really important and significant, without trying to be, overly optimistic, because obviously there's many precarious conditions that we're looking at right now, where we see that there's a lot of things that the organizations are going to have to work towards. I mean, a lot of people are just barely surviving in these different communities, but it is important to really join together all of these different ideas and really see that all these local experiences aren't just, an environmental monitoring system or some experience
en manos de juezas de agua,
that are for example, what we're seeing in Bolivia, where we're trying to keep mining companies from coming in as being the only economic alternative to the crisis. But we see that, we've got this large discovery of lithium, which is like green mining, and the women, I think that we can say that they are really politically clear, and that those are not the answers we're looking for, and that if we're going to look towards justice in an environmental terms, we need to think about an anti-colonial justice, and we also have to think about an anti-patriarchal justice, because this idea of, green energy, this is something that we already know, like a mining company is going to come and just take everything away and take all of our water sources and the autonomous territory and take it up and replace it with some sort of landfill and put a park and say, this mining company is working towards environmental management that's sustainable. And so, don't throw your trash in the street. And so, we've seen this for many different decades. And when they come to try to impose projects like large dams, communities are really clear in how they can, fight against this, and also talk about the alternatives that are actually real and that are actually coming together and that are announcing about this need to really manage things at a more global level. And so I think that I went over time, but that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much, Carmen. I'm sorry. Everything's great. I don't know who's speaking right now.
Edgardo, si puede, por favor.
If you could silence your mic, thanks. Okay, thank you, Carmen. That was great. Thank you very much. Undoubtedly, the consciousness, awareness, when we talk about gender equity is a pillar to be able to get out of this ecocide that we are seeing. I think that we're now going to go on to the Q&A section. Liliana, I thought that we have quite a few questions. I think we've got like 14 questions. We're not going to have enough time to answer all of these, but I think we are going to give everybody all of the questions that we have. So we're going to choose a couple of different questions that we've seen. Just looking real quick. There's one from David Chen, which is in English, who said, to what extent has the Odebrecht scandal put the Latin American environmental movement back with regards to infrastructure? And how do we move forward with a just transition without political accountability across the region? So this is a question. I'm going to read two more. Another question here was, what role does technology, Western technology, play in grassroots technological transformations? And another question is could it be that the real transition could be looking for new ways of consumption, looking for ways to live well within our Pachamama? And so I'm going to leave those three questions, and then we will go on to a second round with our speakers. And Liliana is going to give us some questions. Okay, so reading these questions that people put, some people also put some questions in the chat, but there's also a question we're a little concerned that if we look at the different alternatives that we've talked about, this concept of development and sustainable development. There's also a concern here from Natalia, who wants to know if we can talk about grassroots economy in a way that can help us with the solidarity and popular economy. And also we have a comment here that talks about decolonization. And I think that that's really interesting because there is also, we have, historical processes of struggle that we've seen throughout Latin America, and also everything that has to do with colonial matters. And this is something that's really important in the dynamics that is, the panelists can speak on this as and how they wish to answer these questions or add some ideas that come up. So the idea here is to have a little bit of a dialogue with short responses, and we will then be sending everybody all of the questions that have come out to the different panelists once we finish the seminar. So the thing is, well, I'm going to talk to you a little about the role that technology has, popular technology has. I'm going to try to bring together a couple of different ideas from what was asked here. So almost always when I'd like to start by talking about this issue of technology with a proposal, with an example that Pablo gave us, which is this showing the different experiences that we have in the communities, and I put it in the chat where the link where you can find this. And so, you know, we've been doing this for 2 years. We've got different groups from Colombia, us here, and what we're working toward this, and we've gotten, you know, really amazing proposals that have come. And interestingly enough, one of the barriers that we've come up against with some people, it's because when we propose energy, people think immediately about solar energy, right? Or about technology, Western technology, to put it in the terms of the question. But in reality, here, this is open to other things that have to do with energy austerity. So, for example, how people are starting to say, we need to consume less energy. And so how do we propose ways that we can have energy austerity? And so something that people said, and we talked about it in the presentation, that there is an issue that's really crucial when it comes to development. We talk about, especially in rural areas, which is the biomass. This is an issue that's really central to all the communities, and also biomass and water have been sources for energy that have been really important for the development of the humanity for many, many years, for you know, millenniums. And so that doesn't mean that that solar energy is something that we don't want. Obviously, there's a really interesting experience we've had with solar energy, most of them at a very small scale. You know, we've got these solar farms, but also we can have here, it's really important to have the questions people have, like, what do I need the energy for? Why do I want it? Why? Because, like, for example, they gave us this idea that everything has to be electricity, or that everything has to be engines, and that we need to have, you know, 24 hours a day, we need to have electricity. And, you know, really so that we can manage computers and cell phones. But in the countryside, people have different needs. People need to, you know, grind their grain. You know, in the countryside, people need to pump water. They need to dry out products. And so, you know, the issue of solar energy becomes really important in other ways that it's not a solar panel. We talk about solar dehydrators. And so I think that here, what we find is that when we talk about, you know, the development of these different experiences, how people really take the energy that's closest to them, not only when we talk about terms of access, but also in terms of those technologies. And so, like, for example, here in Colombia, we've got a network that's incredible, that's called the BIPOL network, which has developed a whole series of different ways that they can take advantage of biomass energy, and that incorporate the production of and the generation of electrical energy, which is, you know, really cool. But also, how do we recover energy, mechanical energy, or from animals? And, you know, the bicycle machines, or swings that pump water, where the kids are playing, but they're also pumping water. I mean, like, I feel like those ways, which are like easier, more economical, they're, you know, these are really important community experiences. And of course, they require, I mean, other things are required, of course. You know, we do need to be able to, at some point, in some places, people need to have, you know, wind energy or solar energy. But there's, you know, major challenges as to how, on the one hand, you can have access to subsidies, to incentives, to how are there, you know, public policies on all of these different issues. And I left, you know, beside all of the debate when it comes to technologies, what that has to do with, you know, agroecology. But that's, you know, one way that's really powerful for, you know, really taking advantage of solar energy, which at the end of the day is the energy that really moves everything on the planet. Because even, you know, fossil fuel is solar energy that's been put into fossils. And so, that's where I'm going to stop. I just wanted to take a question that we got on Facebook that we hadn't seen, the questions from these other platforms where we're also transmitting. And so here, Rocio, I'm just going to put one here. She says, how are the relationships of power and gender have to do with food sovereignty and the right to free determination and the rights of peasants and indigenous peoples and Afro communities and the integrity of their natural resources based on their own worldview. So I'm going to leave that out for you guys so that you can respond in as in how you wish. I also want to just compliment something that Tatiana was saying, which I thought was, just really clear everything that she said. But I just wanted to add two more things when we talk about the Latin American panorama. And so when we talk about energy in Latin America, something that's used, the majority is used for transportation. The second, second comes industry, and then we have people, more than 20% of the energy that's consumed in Latin America is by just regular people. And so we really need to look at things here. Why is it that we spend so much energy in transportation? Why do we need to move things about so much? Where are they going? Could we move things around less? Could we produce more locally? There's a whole series of questions and issues that have to do with the energy that are taken out of this whole question of, we need to have renewable energy, et cetera, so that we can think about, other kinds of ideas. But to think specifically about these other ideas, I think that there's also this question that I saw about, like, where does public policy come in here? And so clearly it's a rule that's, really synergetic when we talk about the possibility of talking about an energy transition at the grassroots level. Public policy is obviously really, really important development. And it's really something that really needs to be pushed forward in a public policy that's going to give us access to energy, that's going to give people the option to produce energy locally, and, to really socialize patents, technologies, so that people are able to construct technology within society, and that we're not going to have, the production of technology in only in public or private hands, but it's something that needs to have more of a societal property aspect to it. Okay, thank you, Pablo. Just one comment here. In the United States, it appears that the main discussion has to do with how to go from vehicles that consume gas to those that consume electricity. And I mean, it's just like such a closed-minded thing. Why do we still need to keep being in private cars? Why don't we find other ways that we can have public transportation, or even, stop having to move around so much? And so this is something that with the pandemic, above all, during the first year in 2020, we really saw this, which is how the ecological crisis was brought down a lot when we talk about the movement restrictions that we had imposed on us. And so I just would like to do an analysis, a study. I mean, there are already studies and there's statistics and everything about all this. But anyway, so continuing on here. Who else wanted to respond to this? I see that we've gotten from our audience. Breno.
Carmen?
Or Carmen? I'm sorry, that I thought Breno was gonna speak first, but I'll go ahead. Okay, so I just wanted to just add a little bit to this, what Tatiana was saying about thinking a little bit about what's going on with the communities and the sources of energy that we're seeing. And maybe when it comes to water and water management is one of the strategic points, and something that we can really think about when we talk about generating different alternatives and also possibilities of, larger partnerships. And so we've had a number of experiences with women who are harvesting water, both when we're talking here about climate change, taking on climate change because of floods or because of droughts, depending on the time of year. And so this is something that it's not a matter of technology, but rather if we could kind of like, use certain strategies and exchange ideas and really, you know, at a larger scale, we think that we could really go deeper when we talk about political matters, when we talk about autonomy, about water management. And we see that there's a lot of different communities, a lot of different experiences that have, you know, working against this privatization of the water. And so I think that it's really important to talk about that. And I think it's also wanted like to ask, answer the question about gender and machismo. And so I've really seen here, and we've seen here, how extractivism and mining and other ways where people are damaging the environment, what we have is that, you know, it's like the patriarchy comes back, and we put women in a situation where culturally they were taking on way too much work with violence, increases in you know, this is a really clear increase that when there's mining, where we've got oil production, that's where you've got, you know, human trafficking, that's where you've got networks of prostitution, forced prostitution, you've got an increase of violence because of increased consumption of alcohol. These are all conditions. And it's not just it's just not it's not it's not a casualty. I mean, it's not something that it just so happened that happened during the pandemic. And, you know, I mean, really, it's something that's shown us the reality of what's actually happening. Thank you, Carmen. Okay, now, Brino, would you like to participate? I think that his connection fell out. Well, maybe there's time for another question. We've got a question here for Carmen. What is an anti-patriarchal transition, and how do you propose this from a vision of a Southern anti-colonialism? Carmen, can you give us some ideas about this?
Sí, pues yo creo que esa es una pregunta
I
muy
think that
general.
that's a really general question. I'm going to turn off my camera so that because I don't have a good connection here. This is a really general question, and I think that it's a question about how to build from the different alternatives, taking into account both women, the political role, that really have all the different tasks that have to do with caretaking that have been made invisible over the course of time. You know, taking care of the seeds, you know, as is talked about in many different communities, taking care of children, families, water management, which is mostly managed by women, taking care of the different territories, collective memory, the being able to revitalize all of these different actions and all of these different roles that women have historically taken on, and to give them that opportunity now that they have, you know, I think that these are all different possibilities that we have, and also to really think about this based on, I think, in this just transition of the geopolitical construction, you know, what is the place that we women have had here in the global South, you know, indigenous women, mixed race women, here in this distribution of power. And so I think that it's a provocation that would lead us to really, you know, think about this. Thank you. Okay, there was a question that we had here that maybe Pablo, and maybe you didn't hear, but it's something that has to do with how to move forward on a just transition in Latin America if there's no accountability at the political level in the region. And they had here, the person that made the question, David Chen, used the example of Odebrecht, of the corruption of Odebrecht at a regional level, and how the environmentalist movement responds to this. All right, well, I don't really know what he means by accountability. I mean, like, obviously there has been, you know, corrupt administrations, corrupt companies, in corruption around the region, both just like there are in other regions as well. The problem is not, it's not just the corruption, but rather the policies that are pushed forward by the governments in the region that are associated with corruption that really end up producing impacts that are, really major when we talk about the different communities. Even if there were no corruption, I'm sure that a lot of the projects and the different works that Odebrecht has done would have created a lot of damage and, like the big dams and everything. And so that has to do with, the line of public policy, which in any case was made worse because of the corruption that we saw from the different, corrupt companies, governments, and public officials. So, regardless, I think that the problem here is the need to have public policies that are really focused on a grassroots ecological environment transition. And so, there's a lot of difficulty when it comes to implementing. That's why we're having this discussion as to how these experience or how these different alternatives that come out from the local sphere can really generate, something new, something that will allow us to think about really a socio-ecological transformation that's different and that can really put together public policies. And clearly, we understand that our governments now in the States, they're not really able to give us responses or give us the alternatives that we need. All right, thank you, Pablo. Do you think, Liliana, we could start closing out everything here? And you can close out the event. Yes, of course. Okay, so there was something here that I saw that was pretty cool for closing. And so I think it's something that we can do using the questions and that we have from the different participants. Okay, Breno is here. I'm sure that he would also like to respond to some of these questions before we close out today. So thank you. So what do you think if we let Breno talk for a little bit and then we will announce the next event? And then we can close up there. Okay, Breno, go ahead. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I lost my connection and I had to reconnect through my cell phone. Maybe something was going on. I don't know what. Anyway, talking about the different questions and comments that I was hearing from my other colleagues, I think that's something that's really important here that has to do with, we've talked quite a bit about everything that has to do with, food, energy, care, but the experiences and the practices when it comes to transformation, this comes from a different wealth and intensity that's just really enormous. And it's just really broad. And so it's from what we talked about here, from a more comprehensive view, and we can continue talking about more things, talk about different strategies, economics, the rights of the territory, rights of nature, community ways that are non-capitalist, different ways that we can understand socio-environmental justice. And so I think that the agenda, like Pablo said, that has to do with the experiences, practical experience, especially at the local level, are much more broader than what we've talked about here. And so to that effect, I think that talking a little bit with a couple of different issues that were mentioned today, like how to coordinate, how to articulate, a couple of people asked about that. I think that, really right now at this time with all of these different initiatives, all of these different practices, ecosocial practices throughout Latin America, I think that we're really going forward in a path here where we can build and put together new ideas, new concepts about social transformation. And so during, part of the last century, and this, we only talked about, transformation through states, or through revolutions, radical, something that has to be really fast. But we can also see here that we've got this whole new concept of a transition, which is one that is enriched and has the feedback from these different experiences that happen at the local level. And so I would say especially that are localized, but they're not specific to only one place, because a lot of them have really started to go beyond just their location, but sometimes beyond just Latin America, but going to a global level. And so that's something that's really important for us to continue moving forward in that sense. So that's my reflection. All right, thank you, Breno. All right, so before Liliana closes out the event, I would like to invite everyone to our next online seminar. I would like to say that instead of webinar because I don't really like that word. But an online seminar, which is going to be called Impacts of New Green New Deals on Latin America. That's going to be on February 16th at the same time, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, we're going to be telling you more about all of this. The new Green Deals are understood as a confluence in the global north to reduce carbon emissions and promote economic growth that's more equitable and sustainable. But by taking on global issues like climate change, the loss of biodiversity, inequality, it is important for the responses to contemplate global justice. And so on this online seminar, we are going to propose this question of up to what extent do the different Green New Deals that have been proposed in the United States, in Europe, and in other places take into account the impacts that they could have in other regions of the world. And so how do they take responsibility of these Green New Deals when it comes to the extraction of raw materials that are going to be needed for this energy transition and for the disposal of the waste that's going to come out of that. So all of these different questions we're going to be addressing on this online seminar on the 16th of February. You're all cordially invited to participate. We're going to be with several experts from Austria, from Ecuador, also from Argentina, and also from Argentina, we're going to have another speaker. So that's what I have to say for you today. I'd like to thank you all very much for having participated in this seminar. Liliana, thank you very much, Manuel. And it's really been awesome being able to do this moderating with you and with all of my colleagues here today. And thank you for, it was nice to give you a quick view of what it is that we're working on here in the Abya Yala in Latin America, reflecting with this horizon and looking at these, different experiences, as all of our colleagues have mentioned, and with, really our feet on the ground and our heart on the left. And so, like our colleague says, we would like to really also thank Heather, who was doing the interpretation into English. And I would also like to invite you to follow us on social media, the different platforms that we have here in the Ecosocial Pact of the South. And we would also, we're open to continue having these dialogues and to continue debating. And so we invite you to really join this pact, to reconnect and to really rethink these just transitions for Latin America, but also for dialogue. And, when we talk about in a diversity of opinion. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. And we look forward to seeing you in our next encounter. Thank you.